Good afternoon, good evening,
Good
ladies
evening.
and gentlemen. Today we're having a special guest, Egyptologist Manfred Bietak, who's been an archaeologist for years, one of the main archaeologists dealing with the Avaris area as far as Exodus conversations, as far as his qualifications. We know as far as his history of being in this business, as far as archaeology and Tel El Daba, Egypt, he's been one of the main folks that has been referenced as far as the Exodus is concerned. But beyond the Exodus, I mean, the man has works for days. We could talk about it for hours regarding the Minoan Egyptian connections and so forth, different things that regarding the Minoans traveling to Egypt or back and forth. And there's more to this man than the Exodus. But today we're going to talk about a few topics. Not going to hold Mr. Bietak too long. But we're going to touch on the Exodus, of course, but I do want to touch on the Minoan Egyptian connection, if you want to touch on that a little bit, not too much, and then we could go on that. But ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Manfred Bietak. How are you today, sir?
Thank you. I'm fine.
All right. And of course, I got my brother from another mother, Jacob Ehrman, in the top, and he's basically gonna ask a few questions here and there and help us with this interview. You have anything to add, Jacob, in the meantime?
Nope, carry it away.
All right. As far one of the main things with the Exodus conversation, I would love to hear your perspective on what the Exodus is, from your perspective, outside of what the biblical context is of what you have found in archaeology.
I think the Exodus is a subject which is too much focused in the world of scholarship and also non-scholarship. Or what I can do as an Egyptologist, as an archaeologist, Near Eastern archaeologist, is to present circumstances under which something like this may have happened. And indeed, we have some proofs that the environment, in time and in the topography from the time of the New Kingdom fits to the story of the Exodus, but we cannot say much more. For what we know is, for instance, that communities from Western Asiatic communities settled in Egypt already long ago. I mean, from the Hyksos period and before the Hyksos period. But again, I would like to stress that the Hyksos have nothing to do with the Exodus, except in the perception of much later interpretations. But basically, it has nothing to do. It is chronologically too much time span in between. The time of the Exodus is generally perceived to have been in the advanced New Kingdom already. What we can prove is that people from the southern Levant worked as temple slaves in Egypt in the time of the 19th and 20th dynasty. We have evidence of the so-called four-room house, which is considered to be the prototypical house of ancient Israel in Egypt, in Western Thebes, not in the Delta, in Western Thebes, within the temple precinct of Aya and Horemheb at Medinet Habu. But it dates after this temple precinct because Ramses IV obviously pulled down this temple of Aya and Horemheb to get building material for a new temple of his own, a so-called House of Million Years. And for doing this, he employed people who originate from the southern Levant, most likely from the region of Yeah, from the southern Levant, what is today southern Israel and Jordan. How do we know this? Well, within this temple precinct, there are two buildings which have the prototypical plan of a forum house. They were built of wattle and daub technology, and they have the typical 4 rooms, a broad room in the back, 2 side rooms flanking a courtyard or a middle room in the front. We have this very specific plan of 2 wattle and daub buildings, which already, according to the excavators, the University of Chicago, they were from workmen, most probably temple slaves, who had to pull down the temple of Aya and Horemheb. It's a very important evidence, and it dates to the time of Ramses IV. So this means 12th century BCE, around the middle of the 12th century BCE. This is one part of the evidence. Another part of the evidence is the papyrus Anastasis 6, which mentions a group of nomads from Shosu, so-called Shosu nomads, entering the Wadi Tumilat, which is the connection between the Nile Delta and the Sinai. It's a kind of entrance and exit route to Egypt. And there we have evidence from this papyrus Anastasis 6 that a group of such nomads asked Egyptian border authorities to get the permission to enter temporarily the Wadi Tumilat until the waters of Pitom, Piatum. And indeed, the western part of the Wadi Tumilat was filled with an enormous lake, 18 kilometers long, 1.8 kilometer wide. And it seems that they proceeded until there. Precisely at this point, there was a big, big fortress of Ramses III and already of Ramses II. And this fortress is most likely the biblical, I mean, what is remembered in the tradition of the Bible to have been the town of Pitom. Now we know about the toil work which the children of Israel, according to the Bible, had to do in Pitom. And here we have a Pitom, because in the midst of this enormous fortress was a temple. And we have fragments of the pylon of this temple showing Ramses II smiting a Shosu Bedouin, and it is the god Atum, who is a part of the name Pitom. Pitom means the house of Atum, and he hands a scimitar to Ramses II to slay these Bedouins. So it seems that the fortress had the function of warding off coming Bedouins who wanted to approach Egypt. In this case, in the Papyrus Anastasis 6, however, they were allowed, they got the permission to enter the Wadi, but only temporarily. Now we have some other evidence. In the Ramesside texts related to the Wadi Tumilat, we have at least 4 Semitic toponyms. Among them, the pools of Pitom, Bir Kabot, of Pithom. This is a toponym of a Western, a Semitic toponym. And we have also other toponyms. One is called Seger, which means a kind of fortress, a smaller fortress. Then there is also a toponym of a considerable part of a water called Geshem, which Sarah Israelit Groll, who was a professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, identified as the name of Goshen, the land of Goshen. So the land of Goshen most likely can be connected with the region of the Wadi Tumilat. Then Jeku is the Egyptian name of firstly a fortress, secondly of the region of the Wadi Tumilat. And it is identified as the biblical name of Sukkot. However, the eminent Egyptologist Ellen Gardiner denied this identification, but others agree on this identification. Anyway, these toponyms show us that a Semitic-speaking population lived in the Wadi Tumilat in the time of the Ramessides, in the time of the maybe the 13th and the 12th century, rather in the time of the 12th century. But it is a big question. Are these old toponyms, which were already introduced in the time of the Hyksos period, which is between 1650 and 1550 BCE? This is a possibility, but we have nothing in between this period and the Ramesside period. So it is possible that a part of these toponyms were introduced in the Hyksos period, and another part it was introduced in the Ramesside period. But nevertheless, it proves that the Semitic-speaking population lived in the Wadi Tumilat. Now, another biblical town mentioned, the town of Ramses or Ramesse, can be identified, according to my opinion, with Pi Ramesse, with the delta residents of the Ramessides, particularly of Ramses II. It is north of the entry and of the fusion between the Wadi Tumilat and the eastern Nile Delta. It's further in the north. It is situated in the mouth of the delta, which is created by the Pelusiac branch of the Nile and the Bahr el-Baga drainage system, natural drainage system. Whoever wanted to enter the Nile Delta in antiquity had, and coming from the northern Sinai, he was obliged to enter between the Pelusiac branch and the Bahr el-Baga drainage system. So it is possible that in Pi Ramesse is another biblical toponym, Ramesse. But be this as it may be, both towns, Pi Ramesse and Pithom, are suitable as starting points for an exodus. They fit to the historical geography of the Eastern Delta in the Ramesside period. This for sure. And now we can ask ourselves, in which periods is it likely that a bigger amount of people could leave the Nile Delta, could leave Egyptian territory without being stopped by the Egyptians. And I see only two two possibilities. And I also think there were, if there was an exodus, there were maybe several exoduses, at least two. The first possibility is in the reign of King Setnacht. He is the founder of the 20th dynasty, the father of the famous Ramses III. He was a general. And before that, there was a kind of period of unrest in Egypt. And it was a period when, for instance, a man of power of Syrian origin, he was called Irsu, the man who made himself, had a say, played an important political part. And the other party may have been the party of Setnacht, who was a general. Anyway, in this period of unrest, which lasted several years, this is a period where one could imagine that a bigger group of people who wanted to leave Egypt could do so without being stopped by the border control. What is a bigger group? I don't think it were thousands. It may be maximum some hundreds of people and not more. But their further history gave them later a particular importance of this story, how the Exodus has happened. A second period when an Exodus may have happened is the period of Ramses III. In his reign, it's early 12th century BCE. In his reign, the sea people, the Philistines in particular, tried to invade Egypt. They built bridgeheads in the southern Levant, in what is today Israel, later Philistia, and were able to wrestle this part away from the Egyptian control. So what is later Philistia was practically a bridgehead from where they moved to Egypt, or at least tried to move to Egypt, by land and by sea. And it was Ramses III who, in two enormous battles, was able to stop them from entering the Nile Delta and stop them to access Egypt on the land route. And we know from an excavation of James Hofmeyr at Tel El Borg that this fortress at least suffered damage in this time. They have evidence of a conflagration at the entrance to this fortress. Anyway, in this period of turmoil, one could imagine that there was a good chance to get away from Egypt without being stopped by Egyptian authorities. And it was Ramses III, who reinforced the fortresses at the eastern border of Egypt. The big fortress in the Wadi Tumilat at Tel El-Rotaba. The walls of this fortress were strengthened to a double thickness, enormous thickness has the walls of this fortress, and an enormous entrance tower. And we also have evidence that Ramses III built other fortresses, at least smaller fortresses, in the Isthmus of Suez. One was found at Tel Kolthum, north of Suez. It's also a fortress, not a small one, but let us say a medium-sized fortress. And I think there was a whole series of such fortresses built by Ramses III. in the Isthmus of Suez, but they were destroyed. They disappeared when the Suez Canal was built in the 19th century. Now, who were the workmen? From where was Ramses III able to recruit workmen for this enormous building effort, defensive building effort? Because the region was only thinly settled. And we know now that in the Wadi Tumilat, there lived people who spoke a Semitic language. And probably it's even likely that they tried to convince these people or to recruit these people for building labor, what nomads, even in our days, wouldn't like to be forced. And in this region, it was easy to just to go away and to leave overnight. I mean, surely in the Wadi Tumilat, as we have it illustrated in the papyrus Anastasis 6, were living Shosu Bedouins who were sedentary. They entered on the basis of a temporary immigration, but they didn't leave, obviously. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the Semitic toponyms. Anyway, according to a likely scenario, it seems that such recruits would have left the eastern border of Egypt, and this could be remembered later as a kind of exodus. Well, so far my explanation concerning also one thing is interesting, and it was the very well-known scholar Gary Rensburg who suggested this. In the book of Exodus, when the settlement in Canaan started, there is no mention of meeting any Egyptians. And Canaan had been an Egyptian province with centers of administration and so on. And it is very strange that the book of the Bible, the book of Exodus, doesn't mention in no time an Egyptian, meeting Egyptians after leaving Egypt. And this is remarkable. And also this is a hint that the settlement of Canaan started only after the Egyptians had lost this province, partly to the sea people, partly to other invaders, such as the Proto-Israelites. And even if, the group of which we attribute to the Exodus, the possible group which we attribute to the Exodus, were considered as Proto-Israelites also, it doesn't mean that all Proto-Israelites went to Egypt. No, it was a relatively small group, several hundred perhaps, who made their way to Canaan. And others came directly to Canaan, maybe from Transjordan, maybe from the north. This is still to be debated or is in debate. Well, so far my expose about the Exodus.
Okay. Now, as far as Tel El Daba, the people that were there that left, were those people, in your opinion, a part of the group that went into Canaan?
No, this is not possible. There were also a Western Semitic group which came to Egypt not at once, but maybe in several instances. Anyway, it's a very complicated story, but there were 400 years before the Proto-Israelites. So they cannot have anything to do with them. They were also Semitic-speaking people, but we call them Canaanites or Amorites. Those who settled originally in Canaan before the Proto-Israelites. And the only link between the two groups is a so-called stela of 400 years, and also the mentioning in the Bible that the Israelites stayed 400 years in Egypt. But this is absolutely, how shall I say it? This is an unreasonable assumption. I think that the stela of 400 years, which remembers the introduction of the cult of the northern Syrian storm god Bart to Egypt. This happened around 1700 BCE, in the time of the 14th dynasty. And we have even evidence of temples, of Near Eastern types of temples in Tel Taba. And this happened already before the Hyksos period. But this cult continued through the Hyksos period. It continued even during the time of the 18th dynasty, as we know from the port of the pharaohs called Peru-Nefer. In Peru-Nefer were several temples of Near Eastern gods, because this port was connected to the Levant. And of course, the stela of 400 years remembers the introduction of the Syrian storm god in Egypt, but in a kind of Egyptian interpretatio Egyptiaca, with the name of the Egyptian storm god Set. And Set indeed was introduced in the Delta in the time of the 14th dynasty, let us say around 1700. And 400 years later, the dynasty, or the 19th dynasty, the so-called Ramessides, choose this god to be the ancestor god of this new dynasty. They were of non-royal origin. The founder of this dynasty, he was a general. He was so to say, a colleague of the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, Horemheb. So Ramses I, the founder of the 19th dynasty, he originated from the Delta, as we can see by his titles, and also Seti I, his son, and also the father of Ramses I, who was only a vizier, had titles which suggests that this person originated from the Eastern Delta. So therefore, they were familiar with the Near Eastern storm god Baal Zephon, and choose him to be the ancestor god, because if they have a divine origin, so to say, this is the legitimization of kingship of this dynasty. And I think the mentioning of the stay of the Israelites of 400 years may have something to do with this cult of Baal Zephon, or of the storm god Set in the Eastern Delta of 400 years. But it has nothing to do with the stay, with the settlement of Israelites on Egyptian territory.
Wow. I think when we try to use, do you think it's in general, with your first statement that you made early on, you talked about too much attention is paid to the Exodus from the theologians and people who are non-theologians. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what you're saying. I don't think anyone doubts that people left from Egypt into Canaan. Nobody, and if anyone claimed that, they're hilarious.
I agree completely. Yes.
Yeah. But out of biblical, the embellishments of the Bible and trying to prove that, I think, is actually also hilarious, because you're dealing with supernatural theological writings, and then we're trying to use what we can find factually on the ground to try to say, hey, this may have happened. I think it's a lost cause, in my opinion, because I'm not out there digging. You've been out there for over 40, 50 years. I'm not trying to demean what you do for a living in any way, shape, or form, and said, but to try to literally look for the 10 plagues, or the drowning of the pharaohs and so forth. Yeah, I mean, what do you think about people trying to look for those actual things?
Yeah, no. Firstly, I mean, the Hyksos, it is believed, well, let us put it in a different way. Flavius Josephus mentions that the Hyksos left, and he presented the Hyksos as people, whereas the Hyksos means the rulers of the hill countries, or of the foreign countries, right. Which was the title of the Hyksos. And he mentions that they left, they were driven out of Egypt. But we, with our excavations, were able to prove that this was not the case. I mean, Flavius Josephus thought far too much on the biblical tradition in his historical writing. The people of the Hyksos did not leave Egypt. They were defeated. Avaris was taken over by the 18th dynasty. But the people were most probably distributed all over Egypt as slaves, as temple slaves, as also perhaps in the households of the upper class. And a fair part also survived in the Wadi Tumilat. In the Wadi Tumilat, population from the Hyksos period survived fairly well into the time of the 18th dynasty, as Polish colleagues who excavated in the Wadi in Telerotaba were able to prove. Anyway, if a part of the population of Avaris or of the Hyksos-held territory would have left Egypt, we would have seen an impact in southern Canaan, an influence of the Delta culture of the Hyksos in southern Canaan. This is not the case. The material culture in southern Canaan is quite different from the material culture which we have in the eastern Delta during the Hyksos period. And for this reason, we can also exclude that the Hyksos originate from southern Canaan.
Yeah.
It did not. It's a pity that I cannot show you my PowerPoint today, because we can prove from where at least the original population of in the eastern Delta came from. We are much more advanced nowadays. The Asiatic population in the time before the Hyksos, they seem to come from northern Canaan, whereas the Hyksos themselves, and their people, they were also generations already in Egypt before they gained power. And they seem to originate from settlements, of Asiatic settlements, originally garrisons near the residence of the Middle Kingdom. Ichitawi, it was called. It is most likely at the town of Lisht, or the toponym of Lisht, modern Lisht, in Middle Egypt. And it is from there that the Hyksos, at least the people behind the Hyksos rule, came forth and took the kingship from the 14th dynasty.
I would like to, well, before I ask my question, Garfield, does he still appear to have frozen to you? Because he didn't freeze for me.
Okay, no, it's probably from my end.
Okay. Okay. Just making sure. I wanted to ask Manfred, when you mentioned earlier that Atum, the Egyptian god, is connected to a biblical city.
Yes.
No, I
Do
think
you
the word Python. He was talking about Python.
Yeah, that's it.
Mhm.
Do you see evidence or do you think that could be evidence that some may have saw connections between the biblical God and that deity?
I think it's at that time. I mean, it was an Egyptian temple of the god of Atum, but personally, I see no connection between the god Atum and the biblical god. The biblical god may have its origin in the region of Edom, according to biblical texts. There are three biblical passages which mention that the Lord came forth from Edom. And also we have some evidence of a toponym in Ramesside temple texts, and already in a temple text of Amenhotep III, which it's a toponym, but it mentions the tetragram as a kind of toponym, and it is near other toponyms where we know that they can be located near the Edom or the desert of Seir, in the Araba, or beyond in Transjordan already.
Is there evidence that the early proto-Israelites were already worshiping the Edomite god?
I wouldn't say Edomite god. This may bring about an association. It is possible, yes. Why not? If they can, the Papyrus Anastasis 6. Papyrus Anastasis 6 mentions a group of Shosu Bedouins from Edom, but this doesn't mean that they were Edomites. They came from Edom to the Wadi Tumilat and asked for a temporary residence, in order to keep their flocks alive. It was obviously in a period of drought. And we don't know what kind of religion they brought with them, but it is precisely the time when we could expect that Israelites had been in Egypt. And again, the land of Goshen can be, according to my opinion, identified with the Wadi Tumilat. So this is very, this kind of explanation is quite tight, and but we don't know about their religion. But it is possible. I would say it is perfectly possible that it was a group which worshipped already. But we should, worshipped already the God of the Israelites. But we should not forget one thing. At that time, the ethnogenesis of the Israelites was not closed, has not been finalized. It was still going on. Several, perhaps, tribes, ethnica, were involved at that time. And so I think that the ethnogenesis was terminated much later. And but it is perfectly possible that an early group of brought with them already the God of the Israelites. Perfectly possible.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to make a connection with the Edomites when I was asking that question earlier, just to clarify that.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
You're referring to the Shasu, right? That's what you were talking about.
Yes, right. But
Yeah, I think that.
the Proto-Israelites were Shasu Bedouins.
Right, they developed out of that. Let me ask you a question that you possibly don't get a lot. Just to change the subject a little bit. You did some studies on the Minoan wall paintings in ancient Avaris. Can you talk about that connection between Egypt and the Minoan world?
Yeah, this is after the Hyksos period. This we've excavated a palace precinct of 13 acres. I mean, a big palace precinct, and within this palace precinct were 3 palaces, and 2 of them were embellished with Minoan wall paintings, original Minoan wall paintings. We believe that this is the time of the Thutmoside kings, most likely Thutmose III, where we notice a peak of connection between the Egyptian and the Minoan civilization has happened. And because there is a series of tombs in the Theban necropolis in the time of Thutmose, Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and Amenhotep II, where you see delegations, Minoan delegations, coming to Egypt with their goods, offering them to the Egyptians, or in reality, this may have been trading items, costly trading items. And Egypt may have been in this situation interested because when Thutmose III started to face warfare with Near Eastern powers, particularly the kingdom of Mitanni, Egypt was still a land power. It has the navy was just at the beginning, and it was Thutmose III who constructed the port, the famous port of Peru-Nefer in the eastern delta, which was for sure the Teletaba. And this explains also this enormous palace compound. And it was a harbor. We have a big harbor basin and other harbor facilities at this site. Anyway, this palace would support the identification of this site with the port of Peru-Nefer. Egypt had the urge to build up a navy. And because it was in warfare with particularly the northern Levant, and so, but starting already with the battle at Megiddo. At the beginning, Thutmose III marched with his army on the land route northwards to face his enemies. But later he ferried a fair part of his army with ships. And in order to build up a navy, he could either turn to the inhabitants of the Syrian ports, who had the cedar wood and the proficiency of building seagoing ships, but they were his enemies practically. So the only other sea power he could turn to was the Minoan civilization. And this would explain that at this time there was a peak of connection and contact between Egypt and the Minoan thalassocracy.
Okay. Jacob, you had another question?
Nope.
Okay. All right. So moving forward, I mean, you have left a very, very big legacy of work that is like incomparable. You know, no one can say, hey, I've done work as great as far as Avaris is concerned, and regarding the Hyksos and the Asiatics that were living there. Moving forward, where do you see Egyptology, archaeology, what role are they playing for the next 20 years as far as researching in that particular era regarding not only with the, I don't want to put it just on the Exodus studies and theologians, I'm talking about overall finding out stuff about whether it's the Minoans, whether it's the Hyksos, whether it's the Asiatics, the Egyptian themselves. Where do you see us going, or what direction would you like archaeology and Egyptology to lean in?
Yeah, no, I personally would like to combine Egyptology, Egyptian archaeology with Near Eastern archaeology, because these border disciplines, they bring innovative ideas, innovative findings, but it is difficult to foresee. It depends very much on the goodwill of the Egyptian authorities to grant for, expeditions to work in Egypt, and also to foster ties to the Eastern countries in this respect. I think that combining Egyptian archaeology and Near Eastern archaeology is a very fertile field of research. If this could be pursued, this would be excellent, but we all know that it is very difficult from political point of view, at least between Egypt and then Israel and Palestine. I mean, we face here a very strong conflict, which is absolutely stopping all kind of contacts in this respect. But one can jump over that and go into Lebanon. I mean, it was Byblos and other downtowns in the Lebanon, which were the best partners of Egypt, and also Syria. I mean, we have Ugarit was an important harbor town, but there were many others. There was a whole chain of harbor towns who had contacts to Egypt, but also inland powers such as Gatna or Al-Alach. They all had contacts with Egypt. And to intensify research there will enlighten historical conclusions of what once has happened in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. The same, of course, the same can be done with the Minoan civilization and the Mycenaean civilization, and Cyprus is a very important part of the contacts with Egypt, the maritime contacts with Egypt. And just recently, my colleague Peter Fischer excavated a very rich cemetery at Hala Sultan Tekke in eastern Cyprus, and he finds many Egyptian objects, very valuable Egyptian objects, which show that the mutual trade must have been quite considerable. I think, this is what I would suggest, but many Egyptologists prefer to see Egypt as a kind of autochthonous region, and they would like to do more research on the autochthonous development of Egyptian civilization. But it is much richer if you put Egypt in the context of the ancient world, of its neighbors. And the same is true with the southern neighbors, with the Sudan, with Nubia. And many colleagues go now to the Sudan. Until now it's another troublesome area, unfortunately. But I have personal friends who work in the Sudan, and they they do a very valuable research and show that with the knowledge of Egyptian archaeology, you can open the doors to Africa.
Okay, that's beautiful. You've been in archaeology for such a long time. Do you remember, if possible, who was your inspiration for getting into Egyptology and archaeology? I know it's a long time before you got into it, years ago, but
originally I was interested in African archaeology, African prehistory, and I started to study African prehistory. And then, of course, Egypt was always a fascinating region of research. And then came the period of when the Nasser high dam was constructed, and this enormous overflow lake would drown many antiquities, and the UNESCO gave an international call to the nations, the civilized nations, to participate in the safeguarding of Nubian monuments. And I was still a PhD student at that time. It had already a dissertation on the Nubian sea group culture. And I had the opportunity to join an expedition, an Austrian expedition to salvage Nubia. One of my teachers, he was a European prehistorian, Professor Kraumer, but he relied on me, on my inside knowledge about Nubia, and he took me with him. And thus started my career as an Egyptian archaeologist from Nubia. But then I jumped to the other part of Egypt, to the northern part of Egypt, and I identified the capital of the Hyksos, and was able to verify already a suggestion of an Egyptian archaeologist, Labib Habashi, who always maintained that Avaris, the capital of the Hyksos, was at Tel Daba, but he couldn't prove it, and nobody believed him. But we were able to provide the proofs, and now we were working there for many, many campaigns, and it's a pity that at the moment a continuation at this site is not possible.
Okay. All right. What about moving forward, your legacy? Who do you see as an understudy or someone in the field today who you see will carry your work on?
Well, I see, for instance, a Polish mission in the Wadi Tumilat who do a very valuable work. Number one, with the remains of the Hyksos period, and secondly, the remains of the Ramesside period. They excavate this enormous fortress at Tel Retaba. There are some who continue our legacy there, but I see also other possibilities. I mean, the delta, which was neglected for many, many years, became now a field of interest also for other archaeological missions, and this is very important now. I think a site like Tel Daba may have had also a similar counterpart in the time of the Old Kingdom, because we know in the time of the Old Kingdom, the seafarers, the Egyptian mariners were of Near Eastern origin. We have wall reliefs in the Temple of Sahura showing a whole fleet of Egyptian ships coming back with sailors who are at the steering oars. And also over 100 years later, in the time of Unas, King Unas, late 5th dynasty, we have wall reliefs showing the seagoing navy is manned with Near Eastern seamen, whereas the shippers of the Nile navigation were Egyptians. And I think the same the same scenario repeated in the Middle Kingdom, and the same scenario would have repeated in the New Kingdom if there was not the antagonism in the time of Thutmose III, between Egypt and the Levant. So therefore, Egypt made ties with the Minoans for a certain time. Later, they had their own navy, a big navy, and became themselves a formidable sea power.
All right, I think that's it for me from my end. And one last comment before you get out of here, Dr. Bietak. Have you ever received like hate mail from either fundamentalists from that end or from hate mail from the folks who don't believe regarding your studies in archaeology and Egyptology?
No, I wouldn't say hate mail, no. Of course, dealing with the Hyksos, one gets, how shall I say, modern politics. I mean, some uneducated people tie this with modern politics, and they don't know of anything, because one should say, historical research should not be governed by modern politics and political antagonisms. This is absolutely against any progress in knowledge and history.
Yeah, thank you, man. I want to say thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. And I don't know what the weather is like. The weather is a mess here in New York. I don't know what the weather is like where you are. I hope it's nice and sunny. But I want to say it's a pleasure. It's an honor to have the opportunity to speak to one of the greatest, in my opinion, archaeologists and Egyptologists in our time. Thank you.
Thank you. You are too kind. I wish you all the best. And I can assure you, we have sometimes beautiful weather, very long, and sometimes now starts a more grim season, but we shall see. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Jacob, thank you, man. Appreciate it, my brother.
No problem. You're welcome. Thank you, Bietak.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.